Hello and welcome to the courthouse in Ballygar, where we're here to give a presentation on the history of Ballygar from the very start to modern times. My name is Paul Connolly. I'm from Mount Talbot originally, and I went to school here in Ballygar. My mother was from Tully in Ballygar, and we have very close connections with the area. I'm not a professional historian by any means, but I have a great interest in the area. I work as a civil engineer and have an interest in local history. We're meant to do this talk this evening live in front of an audience, but of course with COVID-19 restrictions, things have changed. But the upside of that is this will be available to a much wider audience online. Just a brief introduction about myself, I suppose. I wrote three history books, two of relevance to Ballygar. The first one is Mount Talbot, A Journey Through the Ages. Quite a lot about that in Castlekelly, which was 17th century wars and very interesting area. And then Ballygar and the surrounding areas through the revolutionary years. That's very much centred here in Ballygar. Now both of those books are out of print unfortunately, but they're available in libraries in Roscommon and Galway. I just want to mention this other book. It's probably of more relevance even. Michael Martin produced this last year. It's a fantastic book. There are copies available here locally, and it's called From Ballinamore to Ballygar and Newbridge, and I would highly recommend people to purchase that book. We're going to get started on this presentation in about 40 minutes, and we're going to get started right away. The History of Ballygar. This presentation is for Ballygar Carnival 2020. Ballygar started off, there was sites of a Neolithic dolmen, so that's late Stone Age, nearby at Four Roads, which is only a few kilometres away. And there's another one actually in Fuerty, so there's nothing at all to suggest there shouldn't be habitation in around the Ballygar area at the Neolithic stage. There's extensive evidence of Bronze Age activity in the area. There's a Bronze Age mounds located at Aughrain and in Mount Talbot, and a Bronze Age fibula weighing over 16 ounces of very fine gold was discovered on the estate of Reverend Armstrong Kelly of Castlekelly in 1819. And that's the photo there on the right. A Bronze Age axe head and a sword was found in the River Suck at Mount Talbot and in Tully. And then a bog body was discovered in Ballygar Bog during the 19th century, possibly dates to the Iron Age. An important ford across the River Suck at Mount Talbot during the medieval period. And this is one of only two fordable locations on the Suck during the high winter floods. That made that ford of enormous importance because armies and anyone else had to move across just that area during the winter time. There was a castle at Ballygar prior to the Cromwellian War in the mid-17th century. This is probably 15th century of date. It was a fortified structure. It's on the road leading down to Clune Line now on the right. There's no foundations left or anything at this stage, but it is on first edition OS maps. And there's also a 15th century tower house at Aughrain or Castlekelly. Of course, then there was religious sites into the medieval period at Abbey Grey, Kilroran, Hermitage, and some other locations. This slide deals with the bog body that was found at Castlekelly. This is the only evidence we have. It's a letter written by Dennis Kelly of Castlekelly to a friend. And he says, and in the letter, he's on about discovering the body. But there's a theory that human sacrifice and the deposition of the victims in bogs along tribal boundaries is related to sovereignty and kingship rituals during the Iron Age. So that's possibly a link to the Iron Age. And of course, that's notoriously difficult to find any evidence of anywhere in Ireland. The O'Kellys of Aughrain, very important family. Of course, Ballygar, as we know, it didn't exist this time. This is around Ballygar, not too far away in Castlekelly. Calla fought with the Crown forces in the 9 Years' War, and MacBrien O'Kelly of Mount Talbot actually fought on the opposite side. He was rewarded with 9,000 acres of land and numerous castles after the Elizabeth's armies were victorious. And John was a son of Calla. He fought against Cromwellian forces, held the rank of colonel, and held the fort at Jamestown in Carrick-on-Shannon. He was one of the last to surrender in Connacht, and he surrendered to Sir Charles Coote. He was allowed to keep Aughrain and 1,000 acres of land at war's end. Charles was the son of John, a colonel in James II's army in the Williamite Wars. He fought at Aughrim, and the photo there on the upper right, you'll see the Battle of Aughrim, a very bloody affair. And he fought at Limerick. He wrote the only Irish account of the war, Macari Exedium, or the destruction of Cyprus, containing the last war and conquest of that kingdom. That was 1692, and that's a later edition of the book on the bottom right, a book of an enormous importance because it's the only account from the Irish side. Here we have, I mentioned as Tower House, or a castle at Castle Kelly from the 15th century. Well, you can see it there on the left of this slide, and that's the rest of the buildings that grew up around it in later years. This dates to 1831. And this is a beautiful photograph I was given access to by a descendant of the relative of the O'Kellys. Very, very rare photo. The clarity is amazing on it. On the right of that, you can see the original Tower House covered in ivy. And that's 15th century. And that book I mentioned, Macari Exedium, was written there in that building. So it's of huge national importance. Here are two very, very early maps. The one on the left shows Castle Kelly. You can see it there in the top middle part of the map. And the bottom, sort of to the left of the centre, is the gate into Castle Kelly. And then on the right is Clune Line House. It's up on the right. That replaced really the castle I mentioned earlier. Clune Line House replaced that. It was a non-fortified structure, and Clune Line House no longer exists either. This map is from the first edition OS Maps, 1838. And in the centre there, you'll see what the original road was that led into Castle Kelly. And the reason I'm showing this slide is the width of it is about 12 metres long, or wide. And that's very highly unusual, and it could have been earlier, very early, and could have some ceremonial function, because that led all the way up to Abbey Gray. This is a map, not a very clear map, but it just shows a road that has there's two records of it, two contemporary records. Honour Kelly, she was Erla Clonricker's daughter, and she married John Kelly of Clune Line. And he moved to Castle Kelly. He converted to the established church, moved to Castle Kelly, but she remained Catholic. And she used to ride her horse along that line that's shown there in red. That was known as her road to the penal church in Ballatlee. And it's just, there was a record in the Schools Commission reports, and there's also a record in documents I was given access to from the Kelly archives. This is the first real proper maps that were taken in Ireland. These are Taylor and Skinner maps, date to 1777. And you can see Athleague at the bottom. There's quite a few houses there, and you can see Ormsby's castle there, Tobervaddy and Rookwood. And then Mount Talbot is quite a large settlement at this time. And you can see the two old roads leading into Mount Talbot. And the houses went all the way around the corner into Garrier. And then you come to Ballygar, and you can see there's no house at all except one across from the avenue that led into Castle Kelly. And you can see at the very, very top left is Killaroran, the ruins of Killaroran religious settlement. So Ballygar didn't exist at all in 1777. Here is an interesting, this plaque dates to a year after the map we just looked at. It's 1778. And it's Dennis Kelly Esquire is on the left. He's overseer, and CG stands for County Galway. And William Talbot Esquire, overseer, CR, County Roscommon. And that had to have been really on the bridge of Mount Talbot. So it might date the bridge of Mount Talbot. It might relate to something else, but it's a dividing line between the two estates. And both families were involved in the construction of something. And the dividing line is the River Suck. That plaque is lost. That picture is from 1918 and it no longer exists. So here we have really Ballygar mentioned, it's shown. These are the Bog Commission maps from 1813. But again, you can see on the right, among those trees on the right, that house we seen earlier is still there. It's sort of partly hidden. But there's three other houses at the head of what is now known as the Pound Road. And that's all that was in Ballygar at that time. That's 1813. So then, the founding of Ballygar as a market town was by Reverend Armstrong Kelly of Castle Kelly. And that happened in June 1818. So on the right you'll see on Monday the 29th of June and on the last Monday of every month for 1 year a linen and yarn market would be held at Ballygar, and that's the first real reference to a settlement or something of that nature in the county of Galway, and it mentions that it's 2 miles from Mount Talbot because Mount Talbot would have been well known at that time. So that's the start of it. Ballygar was founded as a market town in 1818. And the first houses were built almost immediately after that. They started building it. And just a little note on Reverend Armstrong Kelly of Castle Kelly. He married Leonora Salvador from London. She was a Jewish lady. She was staying with the Frenches in Castle French, and she was spotted by Reverend Armstrong out riding her horse. And he proposed and they got married, and she converted to his own religion before the marriage. He had a living at Gortray, Portumna, That's it below in the photograph. That's not them now, it's a later family, but that's the house he stayed in. He had a son called Dennis Henry and a daughter called Leonora, who married one of the Strokestown house people, the Mahans. He established the market town of Ballygar, and in the year 1833, by deed and gift and settlement, transferred the whole property to his only son, Dennis. That's from a document I was given access to from a descendant of the O'Kelly, relatives of the O'Kellys, and that's contemporary. So that tells us we were always led to believe Dennis Henry Kelly founded the town of Ballygar, but he didn't. This says very clearly it was founded by his father in 1818. Now, Dennis takes over in 1833 and he carries out a redesign, really, but the town initially was founded by his father. So this is the first OS map for Ballygar, and you can see there's not a whole pile here at that stage. You can see 2 schoolhouses up on the right, and the diamond didn't exist. So that's where Dennis comes in. He designs that, all right. But the line of houses where Wall's Hotel was, and from what was Colleran's up as far as Kinney's Corner, that's all there in 1838. So that's been built in the 1820s and 30s. And the Fair Green is there. It's now Market Square. There is one building there. That's the house that's now beside Mikey Joe McDonald's business. And then there's another house on the up just down from that, and that's Kane's. That was later Henry Kane's pub. So that building existed, we know, in 1838. And then further down, you see the police station. That was the house that Michael Silk lived in his latter years, and that was the first RIC barracks in Ballygar. And then further down, we see a chapel at the head of the Pound Road, and that was the first church in Ballygar, what was known as the settlement of Ballygar. That's where the town hall is today. So this is Ballygar in the 1890s, and you can see there's quite a bit of development has taken place. The Fair Green is there now, and the Market Tower has been put in, and the school is there. The 2 churches are there, the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. And you'll see up in the top right, the diamond has been created, and you can see 4 houses together up near where Follin's Bar is today. And they were built specifically for bodyguards of Dennis Kelly. They lived there. There's arches there for them to bring their horses in. He had 26 bodyguards, and they were mostly ex-soldiers. The Kirkwoods came to Ballygar as bodyguards for Dennis Kelly. And his unpopularity in some ways justifies the decision to have that size of a personal bodyguard. And then further up, we will see the courthouse where this presentation has been presented from is there, and where what we would have known as McNamara's Hotel, now the Coffee Drop, is there, and that's actually the constabulary barracks in the 1890s. That started off life as an RIC barracks. And then further down, we'll see Victoria Square has arrived. That was built to accommodate Bianconi's stagecoaches. And then you can see where the church was. The earlier photo was gone. That site on the bottom right, bottom left, is no longer, it's empty. And that's when the town hall is built there in the years following. So then this map is probably late 1920s. It's you can see the presbytery has been built, or the canon's house as it's known, beside the Catholic Church. The bank is there, and the whole street then that led from the bank up to Pa Hannon's carpentry shop or up as far as the church is built. And all the stone from that came from the bed of the river in Mount Talbot during drainage works in the 1890s. All the rest of the stone in Ballygar came from the quarry field. And that was the field that, when I was growing up, led to the old dump. And that road originally went the whole way into Muckenya. That's where there's a field down there, the quarry field, that all the stone in Ballygar, everything was built out of, except that line of houses between the bank and the church that came out of the bed of the river in Mount Talbot. So we're going to have a look at the expansion of Ballygar. And we see in 1813, that was the first map we looked at. There was only the 4 houses at that stage. And then we come into 1838, and we see it was founded in 1818. So in 20 years, there was 39 houses. So that's quite a bit of building in that space of time. In 1841, there was 52 houses. Again, that's extraordinary development in them few years. 1851, 83. And then up to 1861, there was 100 houses in Ballygar. So that's not that long after it was founded, 42 or 3 years. But then we see, I suppose, from 1841 to 51 and to 61, it's worth noting the large increase. Of course, they're the famine years. And, compared to the rural areas around Ballygar, the town wasn't really affected too badly, population-wise, by the famine. Of course, they weren't relying on the potato and on the piece of land to survive. But we'll see in a while that it was horrendous around the town itself. So then, from 61 to 91, it drops. I don't know why that is, because there's nothing really. Dinniskelly sold up Castlekelly in 1864, and the Baggots came in. They weren't very popular. But then in 1901, it's increased again to 87, and in 1911, there's 79 houses. I mentioned the famine. Just the one on the left doesn't relate to the famine. These are two contemporary newspaper reports. But it is important because it shows there was a repeal meeting. Of course, Daniel O'Connell, after getting Catholic emancipation through, concentrated on repeal of the Act of Union of 1800. And a very, very popular figure in Irish history. He failed, of course, to get the repeal brought in. He died in the 1840s. His son took over, but he didn't have the presence of his father. But this is interesting because Dinniskelly, it just gives a bit on his personality. Of course, he objected greatly to Catholic emancipation. He was a member of the Dublin Brunswicker Club and moved to Dublin for a full year to demonstrate against bringing in Catholic emancipation. And here again, you'll see he was against repeal. Of course, he didn't want to repeal because it wouldn't have suited his. He was a landlord, and he wanted things to stay the way they were. But he brought his tenantry into Castlekelly. He brought them in the morning. You'll see here to bring Mr. Kelly's tenantry with them to the meeting. So they were going to go to this monster meeting for the repeal movement that Daniel O'Connell was holding. But Mr. Kelly, we understand, communicates with government on the subject and obtains the aid of half a troop of the 4th Dragoon Guards, who were quartered at the castle, that's at Aughrain, and of a company of the 46th Infantry and a force of police who were stationed at the adjoining village of Ballygar. So you had 2 companies of soldiers and the police force. At 7 o'clock this morning, the tenantry were brought within the walls of the domain, the avenue to which was guarded by the military and police. So all the tenantry, these were boys mainly, boys and men, anyone above 12, 13 was brought in and held within the walled gardens of Castlekelly to prevent them going to the repeal meeting. So he said it was in their own interest, but they were held there, and I'm sure many of us had ancestors. I know my people were in Cloneycaleg near Mount Opposite. They were definitely in the walls that morning and prevented to going to the repeal meeting. Just on the right, we see evictions. Now, Dinniskelly did provide employment through various means during the famine, but this, again, is very much, we have here evictions taking place. And he has this personality that is very, very conflicting various times. So here we see people evicted, and just at the bottom we see the families that were evicted. Our letter goes into detail on the subject, which has caused utmost excitement at that part of the country, the more so as it is about 3 or 4 miles from the Gerrard property. Of course, there was a big eviction there on the Gerrard around the same time. The greatest fears are entertained for those poor people, many of whom are very old, and must feel the greatest privations at this moment. It further fears that the family of these poor people have held land there for the last 3 generations. This is a very, very sad piece of document, really. It's from just after the Great Famine. And it lists people different that had issues during the famine and were to pay back loans, but they weren't able. And you'll see why. You'll see on the top there was a Hugh Kelly. He went to America. We had John Breheny, and he's in middling circumstances, a small farmer. And then Andy Feeney, he's very poor. He died in the worst year of the famine, 1847. The next person died in 1850. The next person died in 1848. The next person was still alive. Then the next person, very poor, died in 1849. And then 1847 again, so the next person died. That was John Fitzmaurice. And then we see at the bottom a Pat Fitzmaurice, very poor, ejected. So he's evicted in the middle of the famine, and he went to England with all his family. And then at the bottom we see again, died in the year 1848. So that just puts in perspective the effect of the famine, not so much in Ballygar, the centre of Ballygar, but around the surrounding areas. There was a fever hospital in Ballygar as well during that time, up behind the old school. And that was Dinniskelly set that up as well. So it's just a conflicting personality there again. Here we have the soup kitchens in Castlekelly. This is still there. It's obviously in ruin, but This was in the walled gardens as well, and originally the home of the gardener. But soup was given out here during the famine, and the door on the right, you see it's partially blocked up. People come in there to get their soup, but the legend states that the soup was given out on a Friday, and there was meat put into it. So, of course, the majority of the population were Catholics, and they couldn't eat meat on a Friday. So there was a lot of converting brought in. People wanted people to convert, and of course the name Balligear Jumpers came from that. And a few families did, including a man called Clark in my father's place in Tunica who had to leave the area after the famine because no one would actually, he was boycotted in the area. And then we're going to start looking at the streets themselves. Here we have Collaren's shop on Main Street. This is about 1918. You see PJ Collaren in the middle there. He bought Collaren's from John Burns, whose name is still on the door, in 1915. And on the left you'll see an oil or a lorry from Cairns shop in Craig's. And on the right you see probably what must have been the first Shell oil lorry to visit Ballygar. Here we have a lovely photograph of Main Street, Ballygar, 1930. The buildings on the right were built from stone, as I mentioned earlier, excavated from the River Suck at Mount Talbot in the 1890s. And on the right again, we see here Ryan's Pub and Travel Agency. You will see just Ryan's, of course, is now called, it was McInerney's when I was growing up. It's now Breslin's. And you'll see on the right the placards at the front. They're for liners, ocean liners. And Ryan's was sold tickets for ocean liners, and they sold 6 tickets for the Titanic in there. And there was a man that became a hero. He saved a number of women that went with him from the Ballygar area and died on the ship. And he's mentioned in on the wall. There's a piece about him in Cove, in the Titanic Visitor Centre there in Cove. So here we have Market Square. This is 1890s. You'll see the 2 weighing scales, one on the right, one on the left, and there, of course, is the Market Tower, built by Dennis Kelly in about 1850. It had 5 stories. It had 750 millimetre diameter or square opening through the middle for a pulley system to move produce up and down. The very top used a brass band used to play there. The music used to waft through the streets of Ballygar. That Market Tower was knocked in the early 30s, and the top 3 stories was used, the stone was used for the extension of the school that you can see behind the tower there. And the bottom 2 stories were used in buildings around the church, some little extensions that was there. One man knocked that building with a sledge. It took him, I think it was 2 or 3 days. This is a beautiful photo of a cattle fair, 1950s. Of course, fairs were held often in Ballygar, and this is a cattle fair, and you just see the hustle and bustle of the fair. These went on for years, and the whole town is taken up with this. Every place was a restaurant for the day. Every place sold sandwiches and soup, and it was just a massive occasion for the area and brought loads of employment and loads of money into the town. And of course, the local men from around would come in with their cattle early in the morning. They usually have the same place. It's set up in the same place at every fair. And buyers would come from all over the country to buy cattle at the fair. Here we have one of the most, I suppose, iconic shops in Ballygar, which is Clark's, and there's Mary Clark on the left. And that's still a place of business, of course. It's Centra in Ballygar today. This shows Kelly's Forge, and this was out the Pettit's Road, as I say, out in Kilroran Crossroads. The 2 Kelly men are there waiting to finish a wheel that you can see in front of them. And this is one of the last forges in the area. You can see the cocks of hay there behind them as well. So this is the late 60s, early 70s. And you can see completed wheel there behind them as well. This is a very, very rare photo because it shows what must have been a funeral. Like, say they're going to Kilroran Graveyard. Who I believe it is Reverend Keelty, very popular canon or priest in Ballygar throughout the revolutionary years. And thus on the left there, that building is Kenny's Corner. That was a dispensary. And you can see women on the corner seem to be wearing shawls. So traditional dress was still being worn at that time. And the cars are all Model Ts. And they're off to Kilroran Graveyard. This, another iconic store in Ballygar, would be Scanlon's shop, and they sold bicycles, as you can see from the photograph, and a very, very popular shop, and not many of us remember Patsy Scanlon used to sell fishing tackle out of that same shop in the 1980s. This again is another very rare photo given to me by the late Pat O'Scanlan. It's relevant to myself, I suppose, as an engineer. It's I'd say our health and safety people would look on this with horror today, but this is what they used to spray tar at the time. It's a horse-drawn, steam-driven tar sprayer. And you can see the man on the right, he's covered from head to toe with tar, and like the fumes from that must have been not very good for his health. But that's what they used, and he was patching the road and would cover it over with chippings. This is the first bank in Ballygar. This is about from 1914. This building was later Miss Gunning's chemist, still a chemist today. The man on the left holding the dog was the first bank manager, and you can see National Bank Ballygar branch on the window there. This is a beautiful photo taken in the winter of 1918. So this is coming up. The First World War is just over. Some men have come back from war, some of them very broken men. And of course the revolutionary years were just starting, and it's a very different Ireland to what the men went to war in 1914. On the left you can see the bank, and that has just been built a few years at that stage. It replaced the bank we saw on the previous slide. And it's just a very, very beautiful photo because it's snow-covered trees you can see. And there's a man just wandering down the road with his cow just beside each other. There's not a care in the world. A very, very nice photo. Again, that came from Pat O'Scanlan. Here we have the main street again. Same year, but this is the summer. Well, it's probably autumn time. There's no leaves on the trees. But you can see a man on the right on the horse looking into Clark's. That's Clark's shop. And you can see some shafts from carts just further up and some wheels. There was a carpentry shop there. They're making horses' carts. And people, you can notice the cobbling along the street as well. This photograph as well is rare. I got that from a granddaughter of the man in the middle. He was an RIC man called Sergeant Mahan. And this is MacDonald's shop, which is later Pettit's. And the man on the very left at the door and the man beside the RIC man in the middle were both MacDonald brothers, and they were murdered in Malahide in 1926. 5 people, members of the family, were murdered. 4 of the family and 1 of their workers was murdered in what remains the largest mass murder in the history of the Free State since Irish independence. And just at the door as well, you have Bernard Scanlon, and he was to later set up his own shop in Ballygar. Here we have a photo of a foal fair. Now, this is during the end of the war, when horsepower was very important. No one had cars because petrol was rationed. It was only given to the priest, the doctor, and I think the vet, and a Nod Hackney man would get some tickets for fuel, but no one else had fuel for cars. So everyone went back to nature again, and the horse became very, very common in the area again. And there's a foal fair. The mares were brought with the foals to keep them quiet while the fair was going on, of course. This just relates to McDonald's. I mentioned them there a couple of slides ago. You can see on the right, Joseph and Peter, they were both murdered. This is their shop in Ballygar, and you can see what they sold, and very similar to what Pettit's had in later years. This is another iconic shop, Martin F. Smith's. He had a hotel, and again, he sold tickets for ocean liners. And you can just see the amount of stuff he had available there in the bottom. It's an extraordinary shop altogether. Later years, this was purchased by John Tom Fitzmaurice, and I remember it as the Ellum Rest growing up. And initially, at the very start, there's a record of it being known as the O'Kelly Arms Hotel. This photo, again, it's an absolutely stunning photo of Miss Fullard's sweet stand. She was from Roscommon, and she went around to the fairs with the sweets. And of course, people didn't have much money at the time, but after a fair, men had money in their pockets. They might have had a few beverages, so they might be feeling particularly in good humour. And you can see the kids, especially the child in the middle on the right there, you can see the excitement in his face. They were getting sweets, probably for the only time in the year, really. But she went around to all the fairs, and she made some money that way. And she came to Mount Hobbit as well, but it's a fantastic photograph. Fair day in 1930s. Here we have a Walls business in the Diamond. This is one of the first parts of Ballygar to be built, that section of building there. and it's another very important business in Ballygar. Now, over the door of Walls was established 1794, but we know there was no building there from the maps, so maybe that's when they came to Ballygar, I'm thinking, and they wrote that over the door then. Here we have, my mother would know this is Mrs. Robb's house, I know it as Beckett's. It's still there, in very good condition, near the secondary school in Ballygar. It's originally a Protestant school. There was another school directly across the road, but that was demolished in later years. Pettit's first shop in Ballygar, this is later O'Dowd's, and later still, I remember it as Kelleher's. They set up there first and then moved over, bought McDonald's in later years and moved there. And you can see the lorry on the right belonged to Cairns of Craig's. We saw that in an earlier photograph outside Collerin's shop. Here we have Ballygar Church, built in the 1850s, and the Canon's house was built in the 1890s. And that church was extended just a few years after that photo was taken, and the stone used to extend it was from Thornfield House, which was demolished around that time as well. The Church of Ireland, Ballygar, this is up on the diamond, built a year before the Catholic Church. This was moved in its entirety to Gortinumba, Portumna in 1931, where it served as a Catholic church. It still serves as a place of worship today. It has been extended and a tower added, but it's effectively the same church. Even all the slates and the pitch pine roof were brought up as well as the railings in the wall, all brought in tractors with solid wheels from Ballygar to Portumna, which is quite a distance in the early 30s. O'Dowd's, later Kelleher's, this again was we seen earlier, this was Pettit's first shop, and this is when O'Dowd's owned. This is about the 1940s. Martin's, still a place of business today, still within the same family. Fantastic photo. It's about the 1920s and possibly into the 1930s. It's Sunday closing time, I'd say, and the lady there with the dog outside the entrance. Here we have Fitzmaurice's Forge on High Street, and Mick Fitzmaurice on the left. That forge was in business from the 1850s. It was attached to the Victoria Square, and it used to fix wheels and shoe horses as part of Bianconi's motor, the stage coaches. But the Fitzmaurices had a forge there in later years, up until into the 1960s, possibly the 70s. Very interesting photo here of Nicholas Hughes' pub in Ballygar, still going today. And but the man on the right, so Nicholas Hughes you can see second from the right, and his wife, and that's Paddy Hogan beside Mrs. Hughes. He actually was killed an hour, he left here, he was representing Nicholas in a court case here where I'm giving this talk from. He left there, he was minister at the time, and he was killed up in Ockram in a car crash an hour after this photograph was taken. On the right we can see Iron Mike Hughes. Michael Hughes, born in Mount Mary, became chief of police in Chicago during the reign of Al Capone. And he also put away, there was two rich teenagers that killed a child in Chicago just for the fun of it. That time in America, rich kids did not go to jail, but Iron Mike kept going and kept the case going. He was offered bribes and he was going to shoot him and everything, but he kept going and he got them convicted. They both served time in jail. But of course he was there as well, as I said, during the reign of Al Capone. Pig Fair, Ballygar, 1960s. Beautiful colour photo, this one. And you can see the brightly coloured carts there. And you notice they're all the solid wheel carts. The rubber wheel carts hadn't come in at that stage. And a very, very busy time. There's a market every Thursday up in the square, Market Square, and there's fairs nearly every week between pig fairs, sheep fairs, or cattle fairs, or foal fairs. So it's a very, very busy time. There's lots of businesses in the town, and everyone was used to look forward to coming to those days. Just have to mention Patrick Sarsfield Gilmore. He was raised in Ballygar. It was believed before he was born here, but he was born in Dublin apparently, and grew up in Ballygar. And of course, he became a very, 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 very famous man in America. A bandmaster and played inauguration of presidents and the Peace Jubilees, and was a man of huge significance in American history. And he grew up here in Ballygar. This slide looks at an organ that's in the church in Ballygar upstairs. It's bought at an auction in Mount Talbot House in 1924. So Johnny Talbot got this, the last landlord, got this commissioned in the 1890s from Gray and Davidson in London. And he had it in a loft at the entrance to Mount Talbot House. And you can see the Talbot crest, you can see it over the quays there on the left. And that's still working today. That original organ still played at Mass in Ballygar every Sunday. This relates to the Ballygar races, a very, very popular event. This is 1897. And you can see the likes of DP French and Cornwall and Caulfield, a lot of the landed gentry in the area. Of course, you can see John W. Galvin there, who had the business in Mount Talbot, and Clark's were Ballygar, and Bailey's, and you can see the McDonald's there on the right, we mentioned those already, and Nicholas Hughes and Martin Smith. We saw there photos relating to those as well. And Christopher Baggett, of course, they bought Castlekelly from Dennis Kelly. So that was, on the right it says, on the left, left lower, you can see Game of Aunt Sally not allowed. So that must have been a controversial game at the time. Here we have an Adam and Eve statue that was located inside the main entrance to Castlekelly during the time of the Baggots. Now it might have been earlier, but it's recorded as being there during this time of the Baggots. It is now located somewhere in the Midlands, and the male figure is over 6 feet tall. Just the top photo there, you can see Tom Kenny and Paddy Egan. When they found that statue in the place, it was a place for graves in the Midlands. So, of course, Ballygar is well known for the carnival, one of the last carnivals, probably the last carnival in Ireland, established in 1945. The fantastic photograph taken in the 1970s of the bumping cars. And there again, that was taken from the tower in the church looking down on the carnival. 1970s again, early 70s probably. And you can see, top right, you can see the marquee. Now, of course, Matthew McDonagh Centre is there to replace that. And you can see behind all that, you can see Cox of Hay in the distance. Of course, that's all developed now. A very, very iconic photograph for a very, very popular event. Now we're going to have a quick go through the revolutionary years in Ballygar. These are Irish volunteers taken in 1918. We see Tom Brehan on the left and Jerry Clancy on the lower right. They were involved in the infamous Ballygar bayonet charge. Both worked as shop boys in Ballygar. Tom Brehan worked in Colleran's and Jerry Clancy worked in Smith's Hotel. The bayonet charge occurred when both of those were arrested for illegal drilling. They marched some men from Ballygar all the way to Atleague and back, and marching outside the military, the police was banned in Ireland, so they were arrested and brought to the courthouse here and charged, and then they were brought up to the barracks up at the top of the town, where Dr. Daly's house is today, and the people got restless and they took some weapons from Fitzmaurice's forge, and there was a standoff, and the police, the RIC, had 2 bayonet charges on the people. There were 7 or 8 people injured in it. And it was documented, went all over the world in all the newspapers. Tom Brehan and Jerry Clancy both left the area shortly afterwards because they served time in jail, a month in jail for that event, and they moved to different areas. Both fought in the War of Independence after in different areas. These are Ballygar flying column. This is just after the truce, so you can see some of them towards the middle there. They're not that happy looking at the camera. They've been on the run for 2 or 3 years. They're just out in the open now after the truce. And you can see William Mulrooney there on the left, and there's various other members of the local company. And Sean Lohan on the very, very right, he was the commanding officer. Castlekelly, this is the end of Castlekelly. It was set alight during the War of Independence because it believed the British Army were going to garrison it. And you can see it's a very, very blurry photo, but on the left there is 2 people standing. And that was Mr. Donovan and his wife. They lived there. They were foresters in Castlekelly. And they were brought out and they got out some of their furniture. And you can see the smoke billowing at the top there of the building. This is an ambush in Garrier coming into Mount Talbot, 1920. You see the Model T on the left. And you can see the 3 men they've knocked a tree. You can see the stump of the tree on the left. They've knocked it across the road. And the 3 of those men are armed. This was taken in Bernard Scanlon's yard in Ballygar, just again post-truce, and these are members of the Ballygar flying column, with Clitter Nolan in the middle. And then you can see Bernard Scanlon there on the left, but Bernard Scanlon was not involved in the War of Independence, he was a non-combatant. This is the funeral of John McDonagh in Kilroran in June 1921. It's one of the only casualties in Ballygar. John McDonagh was shot just about 2 weeks before the Civil War started by one of his own men that He was from Dublin, and he joined the Ballygar, what would become the anti-treaty forces. And he stole a car in Roscommon and came out, and was followed by Free State forces. They hadn't split really at that time, but the war more or less shaping up for civil war, but the civil war had not started. And he shot at the Free State soldiers, and the Ballygar company were very, very annoyed with him and reprimanded him, and he ended up killing John McDonough, who was quartermaster and would have been in charge of all the weapons and cars and everything. And he died 5 days later from gangrene in Galway. These are national troops. After the Civil War started, a garrison was stationed here in Ballygar. That's outside the old RIC barracks. And when the national troops left, the barracks was burnt down by anti-treaty forces. And they are, as you can see, a lot of them are quite young. They are national troops. That was 1922. This is a very good photo, a rare photo I got from Brian Scanlon. It shows Bertie Ryan's motor car. You can see him there behind all the women in the middle. And they were all members of Cumann na Man in Ballygar. Bertie Ryan was actually killed during the Civil War as well. So someone had been shot in Ballygar and he brought them to Galway to get treatment. And on the way back he hit a trench that had been dug across the road and he was killed. So it's a sad end to his life. Here we have then post-Civil War, of course, the founding of the Fianna Fáil Party, De Valera in Market Square in Ballygar in 1927. You can see the Market Tower on the left. This, of course, would be knocked about 3 or 4 years later. And the small enough crowd you can see, because De Valera gave a speech in Ballygar in 1917, just 10 years earlier, and there was thousands of people at it. It was an anti-conscription speech. It was held in Farrell's Field. So he's back there again for coming up to the 1927 general election. Here we have Castlekelly again logging in Aughrain Forest in the mid-20s. The men you see here were from McInches from Scotland. They had the contract to take the trees, and they're all trees sold by the O'Kelly's landlords over the years. Some fine trees there going out in what's called a jinker, pulled by 4 horses. You can see the castle at the back of the top left photo. You can see the charred remains of the windows where it had been burnt down. Pig Fair, Ballygar, 1954, a fantastic photo of all the horses and asses and carts lined up for the pig fair. That's early in the morning, and a long day ahead for some. With Tom Kinney, Ballygar, 1954, washing porter bottles. Of course, the porter came in barrels and had to be bottled and corked. And you see on the right there, it's not a very clear photo, but there's a hen there, and she's a clutch of chickens picking around looking for food. And that's the back of Kinney's pub in Ballygar. Here we have the evening of a fair day. You can see the mess on the ground and the clean-up was just about to start. You see the wall is even damaged with dirt and muck. But Martin's pub is there on the left and the men are winding up for the day. This is one of the last fairs in Ballygar. It's the 1970s. Those 4 young fellas are home from America. Their mum came originally from Ballygar. And the fairs didn't last much longer. Of course, the Mart was set up in Roscommon and other areas. The Marts took over as a place where people sold their cattle. But that's one of the last fairs held in Ballygar. This, of course, another iconic store. We looked at McDonald's earlier. This is the same shop, what would become Pettit's. And that was taken in the 1980s. That's how many of us remember Pettit's shop. Just a quick look at what became of some of Castlekelly. It lay derelict for many years and demolished in 1951. Some of the stone was used to build the church of Creamully Castlecoot, and you can see that on the left. So a lot of the stone that built that came from Castlekelly. The cut stone projection that existed in Castlekelly's southern corner was removed and rebuilt onto the front of the church in Atleague, and that's on the photo on the right. There was a couple of layers of stone, courses of stone taken off it, but it's essentially the same structure. And the rest of the stone in Castlekelly was crushed on site and used to make roads through the forest. And part of that stones that was crushed was that ancient tower house from the 15th century where Colonel Charles O'Kelly had written that very important book, The Destruction of Cyprus. Dim walls were 5 feet thick and the army had to be brought out from Athlone to blow up that building. That was a great pity. So just looking at some of the areas now, we have the avenue that led into Castlekelly on the left and on the right. And on the right, you can see the Grand Bridge. That's along the avenue, still in very good condition. That was built in the 1850s at a cost of £1,000 at the time. The avenue is approximately 2.3 kilometres in length. It's used often by people nowadays for leisure purposes, for jogging and walking to the area. And this then is just Ballygar today. You can see how it's expanded, the housing estates that have dotted around, and it has come a long way from the very first slide, the very first map I shown of the one line of houses. They'll be there on the top right, and they're still today, and essentially many of those houses are still the same buildings. Now some have been rebuilt, like Mourns, and some of the others have been rebuilt, but the rest of them would be original. All would have been re-roofed at some stage and dampness treated and all that, but they're essentially the same buildings. So that concludes my talk on the history of Ballygar. I'm always look out for information, photographs in particular, because I run a Facebook page called Mount Talbot, A Journey Through the Ages. And that's a great resource for people, especially the diaspora around the world, to see the area they grew up in. And anyone that has photos, you can just send them on to that email address that's there, paulconnell@gmail.com. And thank you for watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.